It started like any other quiet morning on the farm, but by sundown, I was in the fight of my life. What began with a knock on my gate turned into a full-blown war with a power-hungry HOA that thought they could bully, threaten, and erase everything I'd built. They saw an old man with a few goats and some tomatoes. What they didn't see, a retired firefighter who's faced bigger flames than they could ever light. What came next was a clash of arrogance, injustice, and the kind of quiet strength you only earn with age. And trust me, you'll want to stick around, because the ending, they never saw it coming. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments what time are you listening, and where are you tuning in from? I'd love to know who's out there pulling up a chair for this one. When I was a kid growing up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, I always dreamed of owning a little piece of land where I could raise animals and watch things grow. Life got in the way, as it always does. I became a firefighter, did 35 years of service, raised a family, lost a wife to cancer, and saw more tragedy than I care to remember. But when I retired at 65, I finally had a little savings set aside and the freedom to chase that old dream. I didn't want a mansion or a cruise or even a rocking chair. I wanted dirt under my nails, the sound of chickens in the morning, and a view of the Smoky Mountains from my porch. That's how I ended up here, 10 acres of rolling land just outside Timber Ridge, Tennessee. It wasn't fancy. The house was a 1970s ranch with peeling paint and a leaky roof, but the soil was dark and rich. And there was a small spring-fed creek running through the back of the property. Perfect, I thought, for a quiet retirement growing vegetables and raising therapy animals. I wasn't trying to run a business or start a movement. I just wanted to work the land, maybe sell some heirloom tomatoes at the farmer's market on Saturdays, and give kids with autism or veterans with PTSD a chance to pet a goat or feed a pony. The first 3 months were heaven. I fixed up the porch, built some raised beds, and brought in 2 alpacas, a few goats, and some hens that my neighbor was rehoming. I named them all, even the chickens. I set up a picnic table near the orchard, where I'd planted 6 young apple trees, and started hosting small Saturday mornings for local kids and their families. Nothing big, just word of mouth. I felt more peace in those weeks than I had in the last decade. Then she showed up. It was a Saturday morning, just past 9. And I was out back transplanting cherry tomatoes into the garden when I heard a voice I didn't recognize, clipped, sharp, and clearly annoyed. "You can't grow food here. This isn't some backwoods petting zoo." I looked up and wiped the dirt from my hands. Standing at the edge of my gravel driveway was a tall, thin woman in a beige pantsuit and oversized black sunglasses. Her platinum blonde hair was twisted into a tight bun, and she was holding a clipboard like it was a badge of honor. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to be polite. "I'm Gina Delaney, president of the Timber Ridge Homeowners Association," she said, stepping closer, her heels crunching the gravel. "And this," she waved a manicured hand at my tomatoes, "is in violation of several community standards." I stood, a little slower than I used to, and took a deep breath. "Ma'am," I said, "I don't mean any disrespect, but this land isn't part of your HOA. It's outside your boundaries. It's agricultural zoned, has been for decades. I checked all that before I bought it." Her lips thinned. "Our neighborhood backs up to this property. We have a vested interest in what goes on here. Your animals and unregulated food plots are attracting insects, smells, and frankly, lowering the aesthetic of our community." I almost laughed, but something in her tone, something hard and cold, put me on edge. I'd fought structure fires in triple-digit heat and dragged men out of burning buildings, but the look in her eyes made my neck prickle. "These aren't unregulated food plots," I said evenly. "They're organic vegetables, grown legally on private property, my land, and there's no smell unless you count fresh basil and compost." She didn't smile. "You'll be receiving formal notice soon," she said, turning on her heel. "And I strongly suggest you remove the livestock." Before someone complains to the county. I watched her leave, her shoes spotless despite the gravel. A tightness formed in my chest, not fear exactly, but a knowing. A warning bell in the gut. I'd heard stories of HOAs before, how they fine people for flower colors or fence heights, but I'd never imagined I'd become a target. Still, I brushed it off. Maybe she was just blowing smoke. That night, I dug out my property deed, zoning documents, and plat maps and spread them across the kitchen table. Everything checked out. The previous owner had farmed this land for over 40 years. The zoning was agricultural. The HOA boundary stopped a good 200 yards before my driveway. Just to be safe, I scanned every page and saved digital copies. Something told me I'd need them. 3 days later, an envelope was taped to my front door. It looked official, with HOA letterhead and a stack of fine print. The gist was simple. I had 14 days to remove all agricultural activity, including but not limited to crops, animals, garden structures, and signage or face fines of $500 per day. They cited neighborhood beautification standards and unauthorized land use. I stared at the paper for a long time. My name was spelled wrong. They referenced ordinances that didn't apply to agricultural zones. Still, it made my blood boil. The arrogance, the entitlement. The idea that someone in a pantsuit thought she could bulldoze my dream because she didn't like the look of tomato plants from her backyard deck. I called the county clerk's office the next morning. "Yes, sir," the clerk said after checking her system. "Your property is zoned agricultural, Timber Ridge. HOA has no authority over it. Would you mind putting that in writing? I'll email it now, and I'll drop a certified copy in the mail." I thanked her and hung up, feeling a little better. With the county backing me up, I figured the HOA would have no choice but to back off. I printed out the documents, wrote a firm but respectful letter outlining the facts, and drove it over to the HOA office myself. A teenager at the front desk looked terrified when I handed him the packet. "Please give this to Miss Delaney," I said. "It's important." Then I went home and got back to work. But even as I pulled weeds from the carrots and trimmed the grapevines, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. And I was right. 3 days after I dropped off the letter at the HOA office, I noticed the first sign things weren't going to quiet down. A white SUV slowed in front of my house, not unusual for the neighborhood, but it didn't keep moving. It idled for almost 10 minutes before pulling off. I caught the license plate. Timber Ridge, HOA. That was when I knew Gina had received my response. The following morning, I stepped outside with a cup of coffee and found another envelope taped to my gate, this one thicker, glossier, and even more absurd. Inside was a formal violation summary, listing 12 separate infractions. They'd written up everything from unauthorized animal presence to non-conforming landscaping, and even claimed I had erected structures inconsistent with community design. The structures in question? My raised garden beds and chicken coop, both of which I built by hand, using recycled wood and standard agricultural guidelines. The letter warned that if I didn't comply within 10 days, the HOA would initiate corrective measures. They also enclosed a fine schedule. Apparently the fee had jumped to $750 per day. It was laughable, but I wasn't laughing. That afternoon, I called Sam, my Navy buddy turned property rights lawyer. We served together in Desert Storm, and I trusted him more than anyone alive. He picked up on the first ring. "Sam," I said, "I think I've got a war brewing with the HOA." "I figured," he replied. "Your voicemail had that sound in your voice. Tell me everything." I read the notice to him verbatim. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he exhaled sharply. "They've got nothing. Your property's outside their jurisdiction. They're bluffing, hoping you'll panic and cave. It's a game of pressure. Well, they're picking the wrong guy. I've been through worse than a clipboard tyrant in a pantsuit." "Good. Still, document everything, every piece of mail, every phone call, every vehicle that slows in front of your house. And get cameras up, real ones, not just the doorbell kind." "Already ahead of you," I said. "I've got 2 installed, but I'll add more." "Smart," Sam said. Send me copies of your deed and zoning documents, just in case they try anything funny with the county." I hung up and walked back outside. The wind had picked up a little, rustling the tall grass by the road. I stared out at the fence line, feeling that old firefighter instinct kick in the one that knows when something's smoldering beneath the surface. That evening, I drove into town and picked up 4 more security cameras motion activated, night vision, weatherproof. Expensive as hell, but peace of mind doesn't come cheap. I spent the next morning mounting them to trees and fence posts, covering every vulnerable angle around the perimeter of my land. Then I posted bright yellow no trespassing signs on every side, even though I hated the idea of having to warn people off like that. But Sam was right. Everything needed to be crystal clear. 2 days passed quietly, and for a moment, I thought maybe the cameras had scared them off. Maybe Gina had looked at the zoning paperwork and realized she'd overstepped. Maybe, just maybe, they'd retreat with their clipboards between their legs. Then Jeff showed up. Jeff's a good man, lives about half a mile down the gravel road. Retired Army mechanic, built like a refrigerator with a beard to match. We've traded firewood and eggs ever since I moved in. He leaned against my fence like he always does, chewing on a toothpick. "You hear what happened at the HOA meeting last night?" he asked, not even bothering to say hello. I shook my head. "No, wasn't invited." "Well, you were the main topic." Gina was on fire. "Called your place an eyesore farm. Said if the board didn't act fast, the whole neighborhood would go rural." Her words. I rubbed the back of my neck. Did anyone stand up to her? Couple of them. Mostly the folks on the edge of the neighborhood, who know you're not even part of the HOA. One guy, I think his name's Peter, asked if she'd even verified your zoning. She said she'd sent a letter but hadn't heard back. I felt heat crawl up my chest. "I delivered that letter by hand. She's lying." Jeff nodded. "Yup. Thought you should know." "Thanks," I said, offering him a cucumber from my basket. He took it, snapped it in half, and chewed. "These are better than store-bought. Don't let her scare you off." "I won't," I said, though truth be told, my hands were already shaking a little. After Jeff left, I walked the perimeter again. The no trespassing signs were still up, the cameras still blinking red. But something about Jeff's warning gnawed at me. Gina wasn't backing down. She was digging in. That meant I had to be ready. I printed new copies of all my documentation, deed, zoning map, boundary survey, even the agricultural permits. I didn't technically need, but got anyway. I made a binder labeled HOA War, Evidence, and left it on the dining room table. Just before bed, I checked the camera feeds. Nothing suspicious, just a rabbit hopping through the clover and one of the alpacas sniffing a lens. Still, I didn't sleep well. There's a special kind of dread that settles in your bones when you realize someone with power has decided to make your life miserable for no other reason than ego. I didn't put in 35 years running into burning buildings just to be bullied off my own land by someone with a clipboard and a personal vendetta. Let them come, I thought. I'll be ready. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that starts out so calm, you almost forget you're in the middle of a battle. The sun had just crested the ridge, lighting up the dew on the corn stalks like tiny diamonds. I was inside finishing my coffee when I heard something strange. My alpacas making noise they usually didn't. Loud, panicked, distressed. I rushed outside, still in my slippers, and froze. My gate was wide open. That gate is secured with a heavy-duty latch and a bungee for good measure. I always check it before bed. Always. But now, it hung open like someone had walked right in and left it that way on purpose. I ran toward the animal enclosure. The smaller goat pen had been unlatched too. One of my hens was flapping around near the creek, and the alpacas were bunched in a corner, agitated and anxious. I didn't see Lulu. My stomach dropped. Lulu was a 4-year-old Nubian goat I'd rescued from a shelter. She had a crooked ear and the kindest soul of any creature on this farm. She was the favorite of the kids who visited. I started calling out for her while grabbing a handful of feed in case she just wandered off. After 2 hours of searching the property, I widened the perimeter, checking the roadside and asking 2 nearby neighbors if they'd seen a brown and white goat with a pink collar. Just before noon, my phone rang. It was the animal control office from the next county. Somebody had found a goat wandering by the main road, nearly 2 miles away. It was Lulu. I drove like a man possessed to pick her up. She looked shaken and dehydrated, but otherwise okay. I held her for a long while in the passenger seat of the truck, her little heart thudding against my arm. Whoever had opened that gate hadn't just trespassed. They'd put her life at risk. When I got home, I went straight to the DVR linked to my security system. I scanned the overnight footage with trembling hands. Sure enough, there they were, 3 individuals, walking confidently onto my land at 2:18 a.m., wearing dark polos with Timber Ridge HOA logos embroidered on the chest. One of them held a flashlight, another had a clipboard, and leading them was Gina Delaney. I sat in stunned silence, watching them walk right up to my fence line, open the goat pen, take notes by flashlight, and then walk out again without closing a single gate behind them. One of the men even kicked at my compost bin, like he was inspecting trash. They didn't run. They didn't sneak. They moved like they owned the place. I rewound the footage, paused it, zoomed in, and snapped high-res stills from the video. I printed them out and added them to the binder on my dining table, the one labeled HOA War, Evidence. I stared at the photo of Gina pointing at my tomato rows, her expression twisted in disdain. They didn't care that they had no jurisdiction. They thought they could intimidate me, manipulate the system, wear me down. I dealt with house fires, chemical leaks, and freeway pileups. But this was something colder, more personal. It was power mixed with ego, wrapped in the veneer of civility. That evening, I called Sam and told him everything. "They opened the gates?" he asked, tone flat. "Yes." "They let your animals loose?" "Yes." "They walked your property like it was theirs?" "Yes. And I have video." There was a long pause on the line. "That's criminal trespass and negligence at minimum," he finally said. "Potential animal endangerment too, depending on local ordinances. Should I call the sheriff?" "Not yet," Sam said. "First, write a formal letter, documented accusing them of trespass and interference with livestock. Send it certified mail. Include stills from the video. We'll escalate if they ignore it." I did exactly that. It wasn't easy writing that letter. My hands were shaking from fury and frustration, but I wrote it, printed it, signed it, and drove to the post office to send it with tracking. Signature required. The next day, Jeff stopped by again. He leaned over the fence like he always did, chewing a fresh toothpick, eyes squinting in the sun. "Heard about your goat," he said. "Glad she's okay." "Barely," I muttered. "I was at the diner last night. Heard someone from the HOA landscaping committee bragging about checking up on the farm. Sounded like they thought it was funny." I showed him one of the printed security stills. "That Gina?" he asked. "Yep." Jeff shook his head. "Man, she's lost it. They think they're gonna wear me down. You gonna let them?" "No," I said flatly. "I'm gonna show them who they're messing with." That night, I installed 2 more cameras, one overlooking the back field and another hidden in a tree near the goat pen. I also added motion-activated floodlights and upgraded the trail cam to a higher resolution model. It was like prepping a fire line. Anticipate the direction of the threat, fortify your weak points, stay alert. But no matter how many cameras I added, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That someone might be waiting just out of frame, just beyond the spotlight, to mess with my animals, my crops, or me. I walked the entire fence line twice that evening, flashlight in hand, hammering new nails into sagging planks and triple-checking every gate. Lulu followed me the whole time, staying close, like she sensed what was happening. When I finally sat down on the porch, the sky was pitch black and full of stars. I sipped cold coffee and listened to the sounds of crickets and my hens settling down for the night. I didn't want war, but it was clear that Gina Delaney and her HOA weren't going to stop. They weren't playing by the rules, and they sure as hell didn't think someone like me, a retired fireman growing food and helping kids, was going to fight back. They were wrong. After what happened with Lulu, I thought the HOA would take the hint. I figured the certified letter, the still images from the security footage, and the fact that I didn't call the sheriff yet would make them back off, even if just temporarily. But if anything, they doubled down. This wasn't just a nuisance anymore, it was war by paperwork. 2 days after I mailed that letter, I found another notice taped to my barn door, flapping in the morning breeze like a surrender flag someone else had written for me, except I wasn't surrendering. The document looked fancier this time, printed in color on thick paper, with a Timber Ridge HOA emblem at the top. They were getting serious. This new notice of non-compliance cited excessive vegetation, unsanitary conditions due to livestock proximity, and aesthetically inconsistent structures. They even claimed my raised garden beds could be considered illegal grade changes to the land. That was a new one. At the bottom of the letter, in bold red font, were the words, "Final warning. Failure to comply within 7 days will result in enforcement measures and a formal petition to the county zoning board for rezoning consideration." Rezoning? That made me stop cold. Up to this point, the worst they'd done was trespass and intimidate, but if they tried to change the land designation from agricultural to residential, I could lose the right to grow food. I could be forced to remove the animals, tear down the coop, and stop everything I'd built. I called Sam and read the letter aloud. "They're bluffing," he said. "They have no grounds. The land's been zoned agricultural for decades. There's documentation to prove it." "But can they actually file a petition?" he sighed. "Technically, yes. Anyone can submit a request to the zoning board, but getting it approved? That's a whole different ballgame. Still, don't ignore it. This tells us exactly what they're planning. They're going to try and change the rules instead of following them." I rubbed my forehead. My coffee had gone cold again. "So what do? "We do 2 things," Sam said. "First, we hit back firmly. Draft a cease and desist letter with attached documentation showing you're operating well within legal bounds. And second, we go public if we need to. Local press, online forums, zoning board hearings. You have the moral high ground, but now we prepare to fight like hell." That evening, I stayed up late, drafting the letter with Sam's help. We included scanned copies of the deed, zoning certificate, property plat, historical use affidavits, and pictures of the land from when I bought it before a single HOA house had been built. I typed up a clear statement, asserting that Timber Ridge HOA had no authority over my land, no legal basis for their threats, and that any further actions on their part would constitute harassment, trespassing, and defamation. We printed it on heavy paper and mailed it certified to the HOA's legal office, Gina Delaney's listed address, and every member of the HOA board whose name I could find. But just to be sure, I hand-delivered a copy in a sealed envelope and dropped it through the mail slot at their clubhouse. There were no teenagers at the front desk this time. The place was locked up tight. That night, I dreamed I was back inside a burning building, only instead of smoke, it was paperwork choking the air, and instead of flames, it was HOA letters stuck to the walls. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done since I moved in. I put on my dress boots, tucked in a clean shirt, and drove down to the county zoning office in person. The woman behind the desk looked surprised when I asked for a face-to-face meeting. "You're not in trouble, sir," she said. "I know. I'm here to make sure I don't get put in trouble for something I didn't do." She pulled up my file. After a few clicks, she nodded. "Your land is still zoned agricultural. No change requests have been approved. Have any been submitted?" She hesitated. "Actually, yes. One came through a week ago. It hasn't been processed yet, but it's requesting rezoning of the parcels along Timber Ridge's border, including yours." My jaw tightened. "Who filed it?" An entity called Timber Ridge Community Preservation Council. That was new. Is that just the HOA with a different name? She gave me a knowing look. Probably. I asked for a copy of the petition and requested to be notified of any hearings, votes, or public comment opportunities. I also handed her my own statement, formally opposing any rezoning and reaffirming the property's historic use and agricultural viability. She took it all without blinking, like it was just another Tuesday. For me, it felt like fortifying a wall before the next cannon blast. When I got home, I walked the rows of tomatoes, corn, and sweet peppers, running my hand along the leaves. Everything looked healthy. The animals were calm again. Lulu had taken to following me around like a shadow since her ordeal, and she now slept near the front gate, ears twitching at every sound. I hated that it had come to this. All I wanted was peace, a quiet place to grow food, raise animals, and help a few people along the way. But that dream was under siege now, not by some natural disaster or economic downturn, but by entitled people who thought their vision of perfection gave them the right to bulldoze mine. That night, I updated my camera firmware, backed up all the footage to a cloud drive, and printed 2 extra copies of every document I had. I stored one binder in the house and another in my truck. Sam said I was being paranoid. I said I was being prepared, because the way things were going, it wasn't going to stop at letters and petitions. The HOA wasn't just trying to regulate me anymore. They were trying to erase me, and I wasn't about to let that happen. I started to notice the change in my neighbors almost immediately after the rezoning rumors began to spread. Before, folks would wave as they drove by or stopped to chat at the farmer's market. Now, some wouldn't even look my way. A few crossed the road when they saw me coming. Others just stared tight-lipped and distant from behind their garden fences. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence. People get busy, minds wander. Maybe it was just me being overly sensitive, reading into silence because I was so damn tired of fighting. But then, the newsletter came. It arrived in a plain white envelope like always, but the tone inside had changed drastically. The Timber Ridge HOA quarterly newsletter, which usually talked about flower contests and pool maintenance, now included a special community alert section warning about unauthorized agricultural activity adjacent to HOA property. It didn't name me directly, but everyone knew. They talked about unsanitary animal keeping, uncontrolled pest populations, and the threat of negative visual impact. My house, my land, my goats, my vegetables. That was when the phone calls started. Not to me, of course. I didn't get the courtesy of direct complaints. But my friends in town started hearing things. My produce stand lost a couple of regulars. One woman who used to buy my tomatoes every week said her husband didn't want food grown near contamination. Like my garden was some leaking chemical plant. Then the little things started happening. My mail was delayed 3 days in a row. When it did show up, it had been tampered with, letters half open, pages folded the wrong way. My delivery box, the one I used for fresh produce orders, was knocked off its post one morning. At first I thought it was the wind, until I noticed the post had been yanked out and thrown into the ditch. A neighbor I barely knew came by while I was feeding the chickens. "I just wanted to say," she began cautiously, "Gina's telling people you've got a rodent infestation, that you're bringing raccoons and possums into the neighborhood." I stared at her. "That's a lie," I said. "I believe you," she replied, eyes darting toward the road. "But not everyone does." She turned and left quickly, as if even being seen near my property might get her in trouble. That night, I found a pile of spoiled meat, raw chicken, rotten hamburger, even fish scraps tossed just inside my back fence near the animal enclosures. The smell hit me like a punch in the face. It wasn't just gross, it was deliberate. I cleaned it up, gagging as I shoveled it into a garbage bag and hauled it to the far end of the property. But the damage was already done. Flies were everywhere, and the goats were nervous for the rest of the night. I checked the camera footage. Someone had walked up from the tree line around 3:42 a.m., face obscured by a hoodie, and hurled the bag over the fence. They never even hesitated. I downloaded the clip, added it to the ever-growing archive, and sat on the porch afterward with Lulu at my feet. I stared out at the field, watching the moonlight glint off the tomatoes, the corn, the rows of peppers I'd planted with my own hands. And for the first time since this all started, I felt something heavier than anger. I felt alone. The kind of alone you don't admit to people, especially as a man. Especially as a man who spent most of his life running toward burning buildings while everyone else ran away. But this wasn't a fire I could stomp out. It was quieter, slower, a campaign not just to take my land, but to cut me off from everything and everyone around me. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking at every sound, every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps on the gravel. I grabbed the flashlight and went outside, heart pounding, but found nothing. Just the night, pressing in. The next morning, I opened my email and saw something that nearly broke me. Someone, maybe Gina, maybe one of her cronies, had posted a photo of my farm on a neighborhood Facebook group. They called it the Eyesore Compound and invited members to vote on whether action should be taken to protect Timber Ridge property values. There were more than 30 comments already, many of them venomous. He's not even part of the HOA and he's ruining the whole aesthetic. I heard he has pigs now, totally illegal. Can we just buy him out already and bulldoze the place? I read them all, each one hitting harder than the last. They didn't just dislike me, they wanted me gone. Erased. Replaced. I closed the laptop and stared at the wall for a long time. I didn't cry. I'm not sure I could have, even if I wanted to. But something inside me cracked a little. Not enough to break, but enough to feel the pressure. Enough to understand why people in my shoes sometimes give up, sell out, walk away just to make it stop. But I wasn't there yet. By mid-afternoon, I was out in the field again, pulling weeds, harvesting, doing the work. Because that's what grounded me. The soil didn't care about gossip or bylaws. The sun still rose. The seeds still grew. I placed a new motion light near the gate, repositioned 2 of the cameras, and installed a second lock on the animal pen. I started keeping a log time stamped, organized with photos and footage linked to each entry. I didn't know how much longer this would go on, but I knew one thing for sure. They wanted me isolated, but they'd only made me more focused. And this time, I wasn't just fighting for my farm. I was fighting to not disappear. The thing about bullies is they get bolder when they think no one will stop them. And by now, Gina Delaney and the Timber Ridge HOA were feeling invincible. It was a Thursday morning, hot and sticky. The kind of early summer day where the air feels heavy and the breeze barely stirs. I had driven into town to pick up seed packets and replacement irrigation supplies, trying to stay ahead of whatever sabotage they had planned. Next, when my phone buzzed, it was a motion alert from one of my field cameras. At first, I figured it was just one of the goats, or maybe a raccoon nosing around. But when I checked the live feed, my breath caught in my throat. 6 people were on my property, 3 women, 3 men, all wearing Timber Ridge HOA polo shirts and gloves. They had baskets, actual produce baskets. And they weren't just walking around. They were harvesting, picking tomatoes, zucchinis, cucumbers, even my bell peppers. One of them knelt in my squash bed and started cutting the vines to pull the fruit loose. My fruit, my labor. And leading them, of course, was Gina Delaney. She moved through the rows like a commander surveying the spoils of war. I watched in disbelief as she pointed toward the heirloom tomatoes, the ones I'd grown from rare seeds. I ordered from a family farm in Georgia. I'd nurtured those plants for months. Each fruit sold for $6 a pop at the farmer's market. I fumbled with my phone and called Sam. "They're on my land," I said, voice shaking. "Right now, they're stealing my vegetables." "Don't confront them alone," Sam said quickly. "I'm 15 minutes away. Call the police, now." I hung up and dialed 911. The dispatcher kept her voice calm, but I could hear the alarm underneath. "Sir, stay on the line," she said. "An officer is en route." I didn't stay on the line. I drove home like my truck was on fire, kicking up a trail of dust down the gravel road. I don't remember hitting the brakes. I just remember jumping out, slamming the door, and yelling, "Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing?" They didn't even look surprised. Gina turned to me, smiling like I'd just caught her rearranging flowers instead of committing daylight theft. "Oh, we assumed this food was being neglected," she said, holding a basket overflowing with zucchini and eggplant. "We're just helping ourselves to what you clearly don't need or appreciate." I pointed at the "No trespassing" signs, at the cameras, at the bright orange property markers. "This is private property. You're trespassing, and you're stealing." Thomas Jenkins, the HOA treasurer, took a bite out of one of my Cherokee purple tomatoes. He chewed slowly, deliberately, juice running down his chin. "Tastes overripe," he said. "You should pick sooner. You son of a—" I stopped myself, fists clenched. "You've been warned," Gina said smoothly, wiping her hands on a linen napkin she'd brought like it was a picnic. "When you refused to comply with our aesthetic guidelines, you essentially forfeited your right to be taken seriously. This food was rotting on the vine. We're protecting the neighborhood." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You don't have any authority over this land. I've shown you the documents. You're not just trespassing, you're committing theft." "Documents can be wrong," Thomas muttered, tossing the tomato stem into the dirt. "Or bought," Gina added with a smile that made my skin crawl. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "You've taken 6 full baskets already," I said, panning across the group. "You're trespassing and stealing produce that I rely on to pay my bills. I've called the police. They'll be here any minute." That finally wiped the smirk off a couple of their faces. One woman started backing toward the road. "Oh, come on," Gina said. "It's just vegetables. Not like we broke your windows or anything." "You'll wish you had," I said, "because now I've got you all on camera, in broad daylight, stealing from my farm. Try explaining that in court." Just then, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up, lights flashing. Officer Martinez stepped out, same guy who'd come by a few weeks ago when they cut my irrigation. His expression shifted the moment he saw the scene, HOA members holding baskets of produce like looters caught red-handed. "What's going on here?" he asked, walking up cautiously. "These people trespassed onto my property and began harvesting my crops without permission," I said. "I have everything on video. Signs posted, boundaries marked. They ignored all of it." "We were conducting a community grounds inspection," Gina said coolly, "removing rotting vegetables to prevent pest infestation." "This land isn't part of your community," I snapped. "And you know that." Martinez looked at me. "You have your zoning documents again?" "In the house. And camera footage of them entering, picking, and lying about it." Gina crossed her arms. "This is ridiculous. We're volunteers. We don't deserve to be treated like criminals." "Then maybe you should stop acting like them," Martinez replied. Just then, Sam arrived, stepping out of his car with a leather briefcase in hand. "I'm this man's attorney," he announced, "and I strongly advise these individuals return every item they took and leave immediately or be charged with trespassing and theft." For a long moment, nobody moved. Gina's face turned an angry shade of pink. Finally, she dropped her basket to the ground and stepped back. "This isn't over," she muttered. "You're right," I said. "It's just getting started." As they left, I noticed one of the younger HOA volunteers glancing back at me with what looked like regret. Maybe it was finally dawning on some of them that they were on the wrong side of this. Officer Martinez took my full statement, asked for a copy of the footage, and promised to submit a full report to the district attorney. He looked tired. "They've pushed boundaries before," he said quietly, "but this is the first time I've seen them go this far." After everyone left, I sat on the porch steps and looked out over the fields. My tomato plants were torn, some broken, others stripped bare. My losses for the day? Easily $500, probably more. not counting the emotional toll. But as I sat there in the late afternoon light, I felt something else resolve. They thought they could wear me down, that I'd cave, give up, move away. They didn't know me. I'd been forged in fire and rebuilt from ash. And I wasn't going anywhere. The next morning started with silence. Not the good kind. Not the peaceful kind that usually greets me just after dawn when the animals are still sleeping and the sky hasn't fully lit up. This was the kind of silence that makes your stomach twist, a wrongness in the air, like the land itself was holding its breath. I didn't hear the usual hum of the irrigation pump. No rhythmic misting from the sprinkler heads. No soft gurgling from the drip lines. Just nothing. I walked out toward the tomato rows and noticed the soil looked drier than it should. The leaves on my pepper plants were already starting to curl. I checked the valve on the main water line open, but when I turned the control switch, the system groaned, sputtered, and gave a weak cough of pressure, then died. That was when I knew something had been done. This wasn't a malfunction. I followed the PVC line from the pump toward the heart of the field, kneeling where the tubing split into rows. And that's when I saw it. The line had been cut. Not once, but 3 times in clean, deliberate slashes. Someone had walked onto my land in the middle of the night and sabotaged my irrigation. I felt my jaw tighten, fists clenching in the dirt. Without that water system, my entire crop tomatoes, squash, beans, herbs would start dying within hours under the Tennessee sun. I was looking at hundreds of plants, days from peak harvest, and now completely vulnerable. I rushed to check the camera feed. There he was, Thomas Jenkins, the HOA treasurer, caught in crystal clear night vision, hoodie up, wire cutters in hand. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who had done this before. In the footage, I watched him slip through the back fence where the motion lights didn't reach and crouch down at the irrigation valves. 3 swift cuts. He didn't even hesitate. He didn't rush. Then he stood, looked around, and walked off like he was out for a midnight stroll. I watched the footage twice, once in shock, the second time in fury. Then I hit record, saved the clip, and called Gina. She answered on the second ring, her voice that same clipped, composed tone she always used when trying to sound reasonable. "Hello? Your treasurer cut my irrigation lines last night," I said. "I have it on video. Wire cutters, full face, time stamp. Don't even try to deny it." There was a pause. Then she said, "I'm sure you're mistaken. I'm not. I've called the police." "He committed felony vandalism, Mr. Garrett," she said, her voice dropping into condescension. "Thomas was responding to reports of a water leak from our community. We believe your outdated system is affecting water pressure in Timber Ridge. He was investigating, not vandalizing. At 3 in the morning? He's a busy man." "You're out of your mind," I growled. "This is criminal. And if you think you can spin this into some noble act of public service, you're even more delusional than I thought. Perhaps if you had complied with our reasonable requests to remove the farm, none of this would be happening," she said, calm as ever. "This is what happens when neighbors become combative." "You people are not my neighbors," I snapped. "You're trespassers and cowards hiding behind bylaws you have no legal claim to." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. The rest of the day was a blur of pipe repair and emergency watering. I dragged hoses out to the most vulnerable rows and used 5-gallon buckets to keep the soil moist. I called Sam and sent him the footage. He didn't even try to contain his anger. "We're adding vandalism and destruction of agricultural property to the civil case," he said. "And I'm contacting the sheriff myself." True to his word, 2 deputies arrived that afternoon to take my statement. They reviewed the footage, took photos of the damage, and said they'd be interviewing Thomas Jenkins directly. One of them quietly muttered, "This is the 4th call we've had from someone about that HOA in the last month." By evening, my back hurt from bending over damaged rows. My fingers were raw from tightening pipe fittings, and my nerves were completely shot. I hadn't eaten, I hadn't sat down, but I wasn't quitting. I was angry. They hadn't just come for my property. They'd come for my work, for my effort, for the part of me that had healed through these plants, through this land, and they'd tried to strangle it in the dark, like it didn't matter. But it did matter. Everything I'd built here was real. Every tomato, every egg, every hour spent turning this place from neglected soil into something beautiful that was real. Not bylaws, not newsletters, not HOA gossip. That night, I installed even more lighting around the perimeter. I set up an additional trail camera, one of the newer ones that live streamed to my phone. I left my porch lights on, and just before I went inside, I nailed a fresh plywood sign to the gate. Trespassers will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Around 10 p.m., a courier pulled into my driveway and handed me a thick envelope marked Certified Legal Notice. I opened it slowly, dreading what I already suspected. It was from the HOA's attorney. The letter accused me of willful negligence, unauthorized water usage, and claimed my actions had compromised the sustainability of adjacent community infrastructure. They were now demanding $7,800 in fines and damages, and threatened to place a lien on my property if payment was not received within 30 days. I sat on the porch in silence for a long while, staring at the pages. It was unbelievable. They'd trespassed. They'd stolen. They'd sabotaged my water system. And now they were threatening to take my land because I refused to let them turn it into a landscaped postcard? I picked up the phone and called Sam again. "They've made a mistake," he said after I read him the letter. "Yeah, thinking I'd give up." "No," Sam replied. "By threatening legal action, they just opened the door wide. We're going to use their own tactics against them, but this time, we're going to do it in court." And for the first time in days, I felt the tightness in my chest ease just a little. Not because I thought it would be easy, but because I knew something they didn't. I'm not just some old man with a goat in a garden. I'm a man who refuses to be bullied off his land, and I'm just getting started. The morning after I received the legal threat from the HOA, I sat at the kitchen table nursing a cup of black coffee that had gone cold hours before. Papers were spread out across every inch of the surface deeds, photos, zoning maps, screenshots of security footage, and the now familiar letterhead from the Timber Ridge HOA. For weeks, I had been documenting every violation, every trespass, every insult, and act of sabotage. But now, the binder was too thick to close, and the evidence was too large to ignore. It was time to stop playing defense. I called the local paper. The woman who answered sounded young, a little unsure. "Herald News, this is Jenny. My name is Jack Garrett," I said. "I own the 10-acre farm just outside Timber Ridge. You might have heard about it." There was a pause. "You're the guy with the goats, right? The HOA fight? That's me," I said. "And I have proof of trespassing, theft, sabotage, and attempted rezoning, all caught on camera." "You want a story? I've got one for you." She didn't even hesitate. "Can I come out today?" An hour later, a dusty blue sedan pulled up my driveway. Jenny Kim stepped out mid-20s, smart-looking, with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a press badge hanging around her neck. She walked the farm with me, scribbling notes in a worn notebook, while I explained everything from the first threat to the most recent act of vandalism. We sat under the apple trees while I showed her the security footage, Gina's crew harvesting my vegetables in broad daylight, Thomas cutting the irrigation, and even the HOA newsletter smearing my name without ever saying it. Her eyes grew wider with every clip. "They really think they can get away with this?" she asked. "They already have, at least so far." We moved to the porch. I handed her a folder filled with printed documentation proof that my land was never part of Timber Ridge, certified letters they'd ignored, and zoning maps showing the clear boundary lines they kept pretending didn't exist. Jenny flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. Wow! This isn't just neighbor drama. This is abuse of power. That's what I've been saying. Would you be willing to speak on the record?" "Absolutely." We spent another hour walking through the damaged, broken plants, torn irrigation lines, gates still bent from forced entry. She took photos, asked good questions, and promised to call once the article was approved for print. By the time she left, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. That night, I sat out on the porch with Lulu beside me. The air was cooler than it had been, a soft breeze rustling the leaves as the sun dipped behind the ridge. I watched the sky turn gold, then purple, then blue-black. A few lights twinkled in the Timber Ridge subdivision across the tree line, and I wondered what they would think when they read the truth. 2 mornings later, the article hit. Farmer fights back. HOA, accused of harassment and sabotage, read the headline across the front page of the local paper. There was a picture of me in front of my produce stand, arms crossed, with the caption, "Jack Garrett, a retired firefighter, says his peaceful life turned into a nightmare when the Timber Ridge HOA began targeting his farm." The article pulled no punches. Jenny had laid it all out: Gina's trespassing, the sabotage, the theft, the threats of rezoning, and the legal intimidation. She included photos from the security cameras and quoted me directly. I wasn't prepared for what happened next. That afternoon, my phone lit up with calls from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Friends, old firefighting buddies, even a couple of former neighbors who had moved away from Timber Ridge and said they'd seen the same behavior during their time there. One woman, a single mom named Lisa, told me how Gina once fined her $500 for improper mailbox paint. "You're doing what we all wanted to do," she said, standing up to her. By the end of the day, a reporter from the local TV station called. Then a retired judge emailed asking if I needed help. My produce stand, which had been quiet for weeks, suddenly had a line of cars pulling in. People wanted to buy tomatoes. Yes, but more than that, they wanted to show support. One man slipped me a folded piece of paper with notes about HOA board members' connections to a local development firm. "I used to work construction," he whispered. "Thought you'd want to know who's really pulling strings." And just like that, the tide began to shift. Even inside Timber Ridge, the cracks were starting to show. Jeff stopped by with a grin on his face. "Folks are talking," he said. "More people than you'd think. Some of them never liked Gina's power plays. That article gave them permission to say it out loud." 2 days later, I spotted a black SUV idling across the road. I didn't recognize it, but the person behind the wheel was unmistakable: Gina Delaney. She stared at my house for nearly 5 minutes before finally pulling away. That evening, another notice was taped to my mailbox. This one was almost comical in its desperation. The HOA now accused me of illegal commercial activity, citing the sale of produce from my roadside stand. They threatened a new fine of $5,000 and said repeat violations could result in legal action. I laughed out loud. For the first time in weeks, it wasn't out of bitterness or frustration. It was genuine, because now they were just flailing. I took the letter inside and added it to the binder. Then I picked up my phone and called Jenny again. "You want a follow-up story?" I asked. "Because the HOA just threatened to sue me for selling vegetables." "Seriously?" she said, half laughing. "Okay, I'm on my way." Later that night, I got an email from the zoning board. A public hearing had been scheduled to review the HOA's rezoning petition. It was set for 2 weeks out, and the public would be allowed to speak. They'd gone too far. They thought no one would push back, that I'd fold like others before me. But now the public knew. The press was watching, people were waking up, and for the first time, the Timber Ridge HOA was playing defense. The courtroom smelled like wood polish and nerves. I hadn't been in one since testifying in an arson case over 20 years ago, back when I was still hauling hoses and dodging burning rafters. But this was different. This time, I wasn't a witness. I was the one under attack. And today, I'd finally get the chance to fight back in front of someone who could do more than just raise an eyebrow or shrug at a zoning map. "Jack Garrett versus Timber Ridge HOA," the clerk announced. The room was packed. Neighbors, reporters, a couple of familiar faces from the farmer's market. Jenny from the local paper sat in the second row, her notepad already open. A cameraman from Channel 8 hovered near the back wall. I spotted Thomas Jenkins sitting stiffly behind the defense table, wearing a gray suit 2 sizes too tight. Gina Delaney sat next to him, her expression stone cold, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses even inside. The judge, Harriet Thompson, was a short woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no tolerance for nonsense. She entered briskly, adjusted her glasses, and got straight to it. I've reviewed the initial filings, evidence summaries, and both parties' motions, she said. This appears to be more than a simple, neighborly disagreement. That was putting it lightly. The HOA's attorney, a man named Davidson with a slick haircut and a voice like a weatherman, stood first. He launched into a monologue about community standards, rising property values, visual continuity, and the negative impact of an unregulated farm so close to their pristine homes. This farm is outside your HOA's jurisdiction, correct? Judge Thompson interrupted. Davidson blinked. Technically, yes, Your Honor, but no but. Jurisdiction matters. Let's start there. Davidson muttered something about gray areas and sat down, looking flustered. Sam stood next. He was calm, methodical, and didn't waste a single word. He handed over documents, zoning maps, official records, emails, notices, and laid it out like a slow-building fire. He walked the judge through the trespassing, the surveillance footage, the sabotage, the threats, and the theft. Every claim backed by receipts, photos, video stills. When he played the video of Gina's team filling baskets with my vegetables, the room went silent, except for the tinny audio of her saying, "We're just helping ourselves." The judge's face didn't move, but I saw something shift in her eyes. Sam pressed on. Next came the footage of Thomas cutting the irrigation lines at 2:00 a.m. Then the destroyed fencing, the smashed produce stand, the piles of violation notices taped to my barn and mailbox, even the one where the HOA accused me of biological hazard violations because of uncontrolled plant growth. Judge Thompson raised an eyebrow. "You're claiming vegetables are a public health hazard?" Davidson tried to spin it as a pest control issue. She wasn't buying it. One by one, Sam brought up witnesses. Jeff took the stand and told the court what he'd overheard at HOA meetings. Miss S. Rodriguez, who lived inside Timber Ridge, described how Gina used fear and intimidation to silence residents. She told the court, voice shaking, how the HOA once tore down a child's treehouse while the family was on vacation. Then came Officer Martinez, calm, professional, and blunt. He confirmed responding to multiple calls at my property and stated clearly that my land was outside the HOA's jurisdiction. When asked whether he'd witnessed harassment or criminal behavior from HOA members, he replied, "Yes, multiple times. But it was Angela Winters, former HOA secretary, who delivered the knockout blow." She sat stiffly in the witness chair, glancing nervously at Gina before speaking. Her voice wavered at first but gained strength with every sentence. "Miss Delaney instructed us to target Mr. Garrett's farm," she said. "She said, if we couldn't buy him out, we'd force him out." The room gasped. "And why would she say that?" Sam asked gently. "Because Thomas Jenkins had a development proposal to turn that land into luxury condos. She promised board positions and financial perks to anyone who helped make it happen." Gina looked like someone had punched her in the stomach. Thomas leaned in and whispered something, but it was too late. The judge leaned forward, steepling her fingers. "Are you telling this court that the harassment against Mr. Garrett was coordinated for financial gain?" Angela nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Davidson stood and objected, claimed it was hearsay, speculation, irrelevant. Judge Thompson shut him down fast. "I'll decide what's relevant in my courtroom. And this sounds extremely relevant." By the time Sam sat back down, there wasn't a soul in the room who didn't know what was really going on. Gina's carefully crafted image had crumbled. Thomas looked ready to bolt. And I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since the day this all started. Relief. Not because it was over, but because the truth was finally out in the open, Before dismissing the court for the day, Judge Thompson gave one final remark. Let me be clear. I've presided over many HOA disputes, fence heights, mailbox colors, even a heated debate about lawn gnomes. But this case appears to involve systematic harassment, property destruction, and potential fraud. I will be issuing a formal ruling tomorrow morning. I suggest all parties be present. With that, she banged the gavel. The crowd buzzed with whispers. A few people reached out to shake my hand as I left. Some clapped softly. Outside the courthouse, a reporter thrust a microphone in my face. "Mr. Garrett, do you think you'll win tomorrow?" I didn't pause. This was never about winning, I said. It was about standing up for what's right. For myself, for this land, and for anyone else who's ever been bullied into silence. I walked back to my truck, tired but lighter. Tomorrow, the judge would make it official. But in my heart, I already knew we'd turned the tide. The next morning, I woke before the alarm. I hadn't really slept anyway. I sat on the porch with a thermos of coffee, staring at the dew-covered rows of tomatoes and corn. My mind replayed every moment of the last few months. The first notice, the threats, the theft, the cameras, the trespassing, the vandalism. It felt like I'd aged 10 years. But I also felt something else, something deeper. I had survived it. I had endured. And I was still standing. By 8:00 a.m., I was back in the courthouse. The air buzzed with quiet tension. The same crowd had returned neighbors, press, even a few folks I didn't recognize who'd probably seen the news report or read the article. Gina and Thomas were already seated across the aisle, but the smug confidence they once wore like armor was gone. Gina's hair wasn't done, and her hands shook slightly. Thomas looked like he hadn't slept in days. At precisely 9:00, Judge Harriet Thompson took her seat. "I've reviewed all evidence, testimony, and applicable law," she said, adjusting her glasses. "This court finds overwhelmingly in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Jack Garrett." The words hung in the air like a gust of wind through an open window. She continued, "The Timber Ridge Homeowners Association had no legal authority over Mr. Garrett's property. Furthermore, the actions taken by members of the HOA board, including but not limited to trespassing, property damage, theft, harassment, and conspiracy to force the plaintiff off his land, constitute both civil violations and potential criminal conduct." You could have heard a pin drop. "I am awarding Mr. Garrett $443,500 in damages for destroyed crops, damaged infrastructure, emotional distress, and legal fees. Additionally, this court issues a permanent injunction prohibiting any current or future HOA board member from entering Mr. Garrett's property without his express written consent." She paused. "Due to the severity and coordinated nature of the misconduct, I am also referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation and potential charges, including criminal mischief, theft, vandalism, and fraud." Gina's face turned pale. Thomas slumped forward in his seat like someone had pulled the spine right out of him. As the gavel came down, the room erupted not in cheers, but in something quieter, deeper. A collective exhale. A release. I shook Sam's hand, but he pulled me into a hug. "You did it, Jack." "We did," I said. Reporters swarmed as we walked out. I gave a short statement, nothing flashy. Just the truth. This wasn't about money. It was about standing up for what's right. About protecting the kind of life that still matters in this country, growing food, working the land, helping others, and not letting power go unchecked. The next few days passed in a blur. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation. Several HOA board members resigned, including Gina and Thomas. Timber Ridge residents called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. I knew change was coming. 2 days later, there was a knock on my door. Angela Winters stood there, holding a folder and looking nervous. She handed it to me with a soft, almost apologetic smile. "They voted," she said. "Gina and Thomas are out. Mr. Ramirez is the new interim president. He asked me to give this to you." Inside was a formal apology letter from the Timber Ridge HOA and a signed agreement stating they would never again attempt to regulate or interfere with my property. There was something else, too. We want to help make things right, Angela said. Some of us. Not everyone, but enough. We didn't know the full story. We didn't see the whole picture. Behind her, 2 cars parked along my gravel drive. Neighbors stepped out, people I hadn't spoken to in months, carrying lumber, paint, gardening tools. Mrs. Rodriguez was there too, holding a basket of homemade bread and a handwritten note that said, simply, "Thank you for not giving up." That afternoon, we rebuilt the produce stand, hammered fresh signs, replanted what had been trampled. I didn't ask for help, but I accepted it. Because maybe that's what healing looks like, good people showing up after the storm, ready to dig in beside you. A few days later, Mr. Ramirez stopped by with an idea. "We've been talking," he said. "A lot of families in Timber Ridge would love to learn about gardening, about real food. And, well, we were wondering if you'd consider starting a community garden as a partnership." I was quiet for a long time. "You want my help?" I asked. "No," he said. "We want to offer our help and learn from you." I looked out at the land at the fence line that had once been a battleground and now felt like a bridge. "All right," I said. "Let's see what we can grow together." By summer's end, it had all changed. Every Saturday morning, kids from the neighborhood showed up with trowels and watering cans. Veterans from the VFW came to lend a hand. Teenagers who once rolled their eyes now crouched beside me, learning how to pinch tomato suckers and test the pH of soil. My roadside stand became something more than a place to sell vegetables. It became a gathering place, a space for conversation, for coffee and corn, for stories and second chances. One Saturday, a teenager named Ben stood beside a cornstalk, almost as tall as he was. "Where do we start?" he asked. I handed him a seedling and said, "We start by growing something new." The following week, Mr. Ramirez returned with a notarized document. It was a permanent easement, filed into the HOA's charter and backed by the county. It recognized my land as protected agricultural property and ensured that no future HOA board could ever challenge its right to exist. I didn't have words for what I felt reading that document. Maybe peace, maybe something more. I posted a new wooden sign at the edge of the property. "Maple Ridge Farm, Community Garden Saturdays at 9 a.m. All are welcome." Gina sold her house not long after. I heard she moved out of state. Thomas vanished from public life. But the HOA didn't dissolve. It just transformed. People stepped up, people learned. And me, I finally got to be what I always wanted to be. A farmer, a neighbor, a man who stood his ground and still had ground left to stand on. As I watched the sun rise over rows of green no longer under threat, I realized that something unexpected had grown out of all this. Not just justice, but community. And that, I thought, was the harvest worth fighting for. I've lived long enough to know that sometimes the biggest battles aren't against fire or storms, they're against people. People who use power to intimidate, to bully, to make you back down from what's right. But my story wasn't just about a piece of land or a few rows of vegetables. It was a lesson in standing firm. When I stood up to injustice, I wasn't just defending my farm. I was defending the freedom to live by the values I believe in. At our age, we don't have anything left to prove to the world. But there's still something worth holding on to: dignity, and the right to protect the things that make life meaningful. Whether you're tending a garden, caring for a home, or simply seeking peace, you have the right to stand your ground. Kindness isn't weakness. And sometimes, the seeds you plant today become the roots of something greater for your entire community. If this story resonated with you, please hit like, subscribe, and share this video so more folks can be reminded that sometimes standing tall alone is how we help a whole community rise.